Yeah, so we left off in the last video talking about the Berlin blockade, had a little discussion about it. So the Berlin blockade is the first real confrontation of the Cold War. These people are without food, they're starving. The U.S. has to respond. I know some people probably put, they should just get out of West Berlin. Well, you clearly didn't learn anything from the last unit in World War II. If the U.S. gets out, then Stalin, what's he going to do next? Well, maybe he'll take over part of West Germany because he knows that you'll back down. And so the U.S. can't back down, so they have to respond. And they do decide to respond with the Berlin airlift. Get these people food, get these people supplies. They said, we will fly planes in. And if they get shot down, then it looks bad for the Soviet Union, but we're going to try. And so they fly a plane in to West Berlin. Over 200,000 flights and 2.3 million tons of supplies are dropped off. A flight was landing in West Berlin every 30 seconds. I think they had 3 airports at the time. And that's a lot. You got 2.5 million people. That's a ton of people without basic necessities. And so they do that for about 10 months, and eventually the blockade is going to be lifted. Stalin relents and gives in. And so the first major crisis that could have, that you don't want to invade, you don't want to do anything, you really don't want to have a world war break out. The Soviet Union's army is more powerful than the U.S., but the U.S. has atomic bombs, and so it's like, man, you really don't want to get into a war just a couple years after World War II ends. And so this was the solution, and it ended up working out where the crisis was averted. They stood up to the Soviet Union without war. In the aftermath of the blockade, the Western Allies, Britain, France, United States, these zones are going to be put together. They're going to be put together to create what is known as West Germany up here. All right, and then the Soviets are just going to rename theirs. They're going to be called East Germany. And the same thing's going to be happening to Berlin, all right, where it's just going to be divided east and west. And they will be separate countries from really this point on. The Cold War is about to heat up. The nuclear arms race is going to begin. The U.S. had shown their strength at Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end World War II. Despite having a larger and more powerful army, the Soviet Union could not compete with the atomic bomb. All right, and they knew this. So they are scrambling to do it. In August of 1949, they will become successful. This is 10 years way before anybody thought the Soviets would have this kind of capability. Well, a large part of it is because there was a lot of spying that was done during this time. The Soviet spies were able to capture intelligence. They were able to get intelligence on how to create this atomic blast, this atomic bomb, and so they are going to create their own atomic weapon. All right, and so now this is going to usher in a new age of nuclear weapons. U.S. just crap. All right, let the arms race begin. Let the race begin. Nuclear arms race. And not to be outdone, in 1952, the U.S. is going to develop a hydrogen bomb. This is also called a thermonuclear weapon. It involves both fission and fusion. And you can see it makes the atomic bomb look like a firework. All right, it does. It's significantly more powerful in the devastation that it could cause, as opposed to the atomic blast. Which is obviously, we read about it. It's horrific and devastating also. But this is going to be what the arms race becomes, where both sides are going to just stockpile nuclear weapons. They're going to try to build and build and build more weapons. And they're going to do this in order to maintain peace. And so what they're thinking is that by having a stockpile of nuclear weapons, the other countries, is the concept of a nuclear deterrent. Well, they're not going to attack us. If they attack us, that just means we'll launch nukes on them and we'll destroy them. So by having a bunch of nuclear weapons, that actually keeps us safe because the other side won't dare to attack us. And that's called a nuclear deterrent. All right, and so the United States builds their nuclear weapon. The Russians will eventually build their own hydrogen bomb, the Tsar bomb. And then they'll begin gripped in this arms race. And the U.S. had always been ahead technologically speaking. In the late 1950s, that's going to change. 1957, I believe. The U.S. had always been ahead. However, it's going to change in the mid-50s. The Soviets are going to produce ICBMs. So now they don't have to attach them to a plane. We read about how the atomic bomb would be flown in a plane and dropped. Well, now the Soviets can attach these nuclear weapons to to rockets, essentially, to missiles that can be shot and land anywhere in the world. And so they essentially mean nukes could be fired at the U.S. from a distance with very minimal warning. So these ICBMs, these intercontinental ballistic missiles, are created by the Soviets. And then they are going to be the first to launch the Sputnik into space. All right, so they're going to be the first to launch a satellite into orbit, the Earth, showing that they are capable. Right, that they're showing that they are ahead of us. This had many Americans worried, like, what else are they capable of? They can put a satellite in space, intercontinental ballistic missiles. Like, man, we got to catch up. All right, so in response to all this, the United States is going to create something called NATO. This is actually more going to be in response to the Berlin crisis. Western European nations and the U.S. began to fear their own security. And so what they did is they created something called NATO. Now, this still exists to this day. In response to Berlin blockade, NATO is created. It's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Basically what that is, it's a military alliance between the U.S., Canada, Western European nations, Turkey, but it's all these nations. Basically, their thought process is collective security. If one country gets attacked by the Soviets, it'd be like attacking all the other countries, especially the U.S. And so now the U.S. and they can kind of protect these countries that don't have nuclear capabilities, so they can fall under this nuclear umbrella that the United States is kind of establishing. And this would prevent the Soviet Union then from trying to expand their borders and taking over Western European countries. It's like, all right, you attack them, well, it's collective security. You attack them, that's like attacking us, and we got problems. The Soviet Union's going to do the same thing. They're going to create the Warsaw Pact with all their allies. I don't know why I didn't capitalize Bulgaria. All right, it looks familiar, right? If you remember World War I, you got Europe is divided in these triple alliance, triple entente. All it takes is a small spark, but now the only difference is everybody's got nuclear weapons. So it's like it could be a lot more devastating. All right, and then the U.S. whole policy of keeping communism where it is. All right, they're like, all right, well, it's already spread to these areas. Truman Doctrine's like, we're going to keep it there. We're not going to necessarily try to destroy it, but we're going to try to keep it there so it doesn't spread to Western Europe. Well, that's going to fail because China is going to become communist. They've had a brutal civil war for lasted 2 decades. The communists are going to finally win. They're led by a man named Mao Zedong, a ruthless dictator, killed millions of people. He's probably worse than Stalin. It's estimated that he killed upwards of 40 million people, of his own people. But now the largest country in Asia has become communist, and this is a problem because now communism is spreading, and now they can be hugely influential in Asia. All right. And one of the areas where they're going to have high influence in early on is North Korea. All right. After World War II, Japan had all of Korea. All right. They had controlled of Korea through World War II. Well, after they defeated with the Soviets helping, what they did is the Soviets got the northern part of Korea and the U.S. got the southern part of Korea. All right. And so they divided it along the 38th parallel right here. All right. So the Soviets get the north, the U.S. gets the south. The North is going to become communist, obviously, because that's what the Soviets are. And the South will become really anti-communist. All right, it's a pro-U.S. government. It's not democratic yet. And so then this is going to lead to the first major test for the UN and the United States. The first major actual physical confrontation, the Korean War. With the approval of Joseph Stalin and aid from China, North Korea, led by Kim Il-sung, invades South Korea and hopes to unify the peninsula under one communist regime. This is a huge test for the United States because the UN has not had to deal with one country aggressively expanding their borders yet. Remember the League of Nations, when they had to, they didn't really do much. Well, this new UN is supposed to be better. We're going to have to see if it is. And the U.S. also, who said, hey, we're going to help you if you want help. If you want to resist communism, we will provide aid. So this is a huge test for them because now you have countries at war with each other. The UN decides to send troops largely made up of U.S. soldiers, so the U.S. does get involved on the behalf of South Korea. China and the Soviet Union are going to send troops and military equipment to North Korea. All right, and you can see early on in the war, the North Koreans are going to push the U.S. all the way back. They're only going to have this little tiny corner. They're going to have a daring amphibious invasion at Seoul up here, where they're going to then surround the North Korean troops, and they're eventually going to push the North Koreans back. But it was not going well. The Korean War was not going well for the U.S. and the UN. They got pushed to a very tiny corner until they launched that invasion, turned the tide of the war. But in the end, after 3 years of fighting, there's no final victory. The armistice is signed. The DMZ, a demilitarized zone, is going to be established, and it's still there to this day. North Korea still hates us for getting involved. They're always threatening us. You can constantly, if you see the news, they're like, oh, North Korea tests a nuclear weapon, says they're going to use it at the U.S. All right, and so this creates just a ton of fear. Once again, this whole thing is about just trying to contain communism, fearing that it's going to spread, fearing that this takeover is going to happen. So the U.S., seeing how influential China is in the area, they start to scramble. They say, all right, well, now that China has gotten involved in Korea, they help send troops, they influence this Korean War, because this is China right here, if you weren't aware. They send troops. They're having an influence in that region. So now the U.S. is going to create SEATO, which is the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, where it's kind of like NATO, where they're going to have these member nations that are going to be a part of them, and then CENTO as well. Basically, just try and say, hey, if you attack them, if you provide aid, that's like attacking us. We're coming after you. All right, and so this whole era is going to really get ramped up with the Korean War, with China becoming communist, and it's going to create a lot of hostility in these areas. And the U.S. is going to be tested time and time again, and it will continue that way for a little while. Hello. There we go.